Good morning. I'm Zinclair Samoa in for Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now. Unthinkable loss, a tragic milestone 2 years into the pandemic. This morning, flags at half staff as America marks 1 million deaths from COVID-19. And President Biden warns that number is still rising.
And with thousands still dying every day, now is the time for us to act, all of us together. We all must do more.
More of the president's message to Americans as new cases trend back up nationwide. Withdrawal this morning, a major setback for Russia in the war in Ukraine. Moscow pulling back forces from Ukraine's second largest city and shifting its focus to the south. This comes as top diplomats meet for a show of unity against Russia. We have team coverage with the latest. Formula fears concerns growing over a nationwide shortage of baby formula. This morning, desperate parents pleading for help. Now the White House and lawmakers are promising action. More on the plans to increase the supply. And top of her game, she's just 18 years old and celebrating something most of us won't do in a lifetime. We'll talk to her about her historic climb to the summit of Mount Everest. Oh, and by the way, she's just about to graduate high school and in between.
No big deal.
I know.
Just
it's
casual.
Such a cool story. We are going to have her on live with us. You have to stick around. Good morning to you at home. Happy Friday. Happy Friday the 13th.
Friday.
A conversation we'll be having later this hour as well, later next hour. We begin this morning, though, with the latest on the COVID pandemic. And the U.S. marks a grim milestone, more than 1 million deaths in this country.
That's right. The United States battles a steady surge in cases in recent weeks, up nearly 58% from just 2 weeks ago. The United States reported nearly 140,000 new cases on Wednesday, marking the third straight day with more than 100,000 reported cases. On Thursday, the White House hosted the second ever virtual global COVID-19 summit featuring leaders from around the world. President Biden reflected on the pandemic in his opening remarks, calling on world leaders to invest more in fighting COVID and also calling on Americans to step up.
We can do this. We can control COVID-19. We can start to build a better, healthier, and more secure future today if we all do our part and if we step up together. So thank you for responding to this fight.
Joining now to discuss this is Dr. Tina Carroll Scott. She's the medical director for the South Miami Children's Clinic. Doctor, good morning. The COVID summit looked back at the last 2 years of the pandemic, but also leaders looked ahead. I know President Biden and the White House announced new investments to fight the virus. That includes programs to improve access to vaccines and treatments globally. Put it simply for us, where are we now when it comes to beating the virus, or has that ship sailed?
So, I think we've been short-sighted from the very beginning when it comes to fighting this pandemic, with richer nations focused primarily on vaccinating and boosting their own and seemingly forgetting about other countries where many people haven't even had access to their first dose. So it's been frustrating on some levels to see the vaccine waste here in the U.S. But really, we can't end this without helping poorer countries when it comes to vaccine equity, better access to testing, and making therapeutics more affordable for them. Many of these new variants that are developing in countries with low vaccination rates. And I think that there's a false sense of security in richer nations where vaccines have been readily available and immunization rates are considerably higher. But as long as we give this virus more and more opportunities to change, even those who are fully vaccinated and boosted won't be protected as we get more and more immune escape with these variants, such as what we're seeing with Omicron. So truly none of us are safe until all of us are safe, and we can't boost our way out of this pandemic.
And I'm glad you talked about that false sense of security, right? Because it's no secret that efforts to vaccinate the global south have largely been unsuccessful, right? And that includes the continent of Africa. We're hearing now reports that the first factory to produce vaccines in South Africa has not actually received enough orders and may actually have to stop production entirely. The WHO, or the World Health Organization, calls this a failure, and you could say rightly so, right, when it comes to vaccine equity. So how did we get here, and what does it mean for the global fight against the pandemic?
Yeah, I think what's happening in South Africa with the potential closure of this plant would be a huge failure on a continent where only 17% of the 1.3 billion people have been vaccinated. Globally, we have to support and empower poorer nations who want to reduce their dependence on imported vaccines by helping them to ramp up manufacturing capabilities. So my hope is that this plant will get the orders that it needs to stay open. And this is not going to be our last pandemic. And so, we need to put the infrastructure in place in these countries so that they're fully prepared for the next viral surge or pandemic threat.
And I'm so glad you talked about vaccine access. I was in East and West Africa in September and saw firsthand how difficult it was even to get tested, right? And I know that beyond vaccinations, especially as the virus continues to spread, a new study was released on COVID transmission. And that found that about 60%, over half of COVID spreaders, are people who are actually asymptomatic. And that number may actually be higher because of Omicron. But we don't want to be alarmist, right? So are those findings surprising to you?
I think that it's just a reminder that we can't completely abandon common sense measures that we've used throughout the pandemic to reduce transmission of this virus, especially as numbers have started to increase recently across the US with the Omicron variant. And we still have many vulnerable people in our population who are at risk, even if they're fully vaccinated and boosted. And then all of the kids under 5 who are still waiting for a vaccine to be approved. And so we're starting to see many more cases, and we're also starting to see many more cases of long COVID in both adults and children. So I think that we should be trying to protect ourselves and others by getting vaccinated and boosted if eligible. And I think also that the lesson throughout this pandemic is that we always have to be 10 steps ahead and be proactive instead of reactive.
Dr. Carol Scott, thank you.
Now let's get to the latest on the war in Ukraine, which is topping the agenda at today's G7 foreign ministers meeting. Diplomats from 7 of the world's wealthiest nations are gathering in Germany, along with Ukraine's foreign minister. Talks are aimed at supporting the country further and putting pressure on Russia. Now, on the ground in Ukraine, relatives of soldiers holed up in that steel plant we've been talking about in Mariupol are urging authorities to do more to get them out. Ukraine's military says it expects Russia to increase its bombardment of the plant now that most civilians have been evacuated. NBC News senior national correspondent Jay Gray joins us from Lviv. Hi, Jay. Good to have you with us. So it looks like there's really no let up here at this fighting at the steel plant. What is the latest, and how are those efforts going to get those wounded soldiers out? Yesterday, we heard a little bit about a potential for swapping war criminals, that type of thing. What's the latest?
Yeah, Savannah, not good. There just seems to be no leeway in this situation. As you talk about, the Ukraine army has said it would make matters worse if they tried to go in and extradite those soldiers, many of them wounded in that steel plant. We know that they've offered to trade prisoners of war, and so far that's fallen on deaf ears as far as the Kremlin is concerned. The UN has been negotiating for more than a month now to try and get a humanitarian corridor in place to pull some of those soldiers out. Remember, they have no medicine, no medical care, no sterilized wraps for their injuries. Some of them have had to go through rudimentary loss of limbs in there, and so it's just been a tough go. Turkey has offered to be a go-between. They've brought a ship in that they say they could offload these injured soldiers onto, take them to Turkey, and they've told Russia that they'll hold them there until the end of fighting. At this point, though, there's just absolutely no deal.
Yeah, especially when you hear about the fact that there's no medical personnel, no medical supplies in there. It really just is dire. Now, we're also following the first alleged war crimes trial of a Russian soldier since this war began. That's taking place in Kyiv today. Walk us through the details of this case. What kind of punishment could this person face? And is this the start of many trials, given many atrocities we've seen?
Yeah, the answer to that last question is yes. I think we'll see several trials unfold here. This is the first soldier, a Russian soldier, who shot a man and has said that he shot a man on a bicycle, a 62-year-old who was killed under orders from his commander. He voluntarily, we are told by Ukraine officials, surrendered to officials. He had a preliminary hearing today. No plea was entered. That's not what this was about. The trial actually starts in 5 days on Wednesday. If found guilty, he could spend 10 to 15 years in jail on these charges. There could be more charges that follow.
And Jay, we understand you've been meeting displaced refugees who have made it to the relative safety of Lviv, the western city where you are right now. Talk to us about what they're telling you and the kind of place they're living in now. What have they been through?
Well, more than 200,000 have escaped to Lviv, many to areas like this set up by the city government. These are shipping containers turned into a community here. When you take a look inside, this is now home for these families, many whose towns and villages have been ravaged by this war. They are stark, cramped, uninviting at first glance. For the families that live here, this cube is a castle compared to where they've been.
Constant shelling was there.
Ludmila, her husband and young son lost their home and community as they rushed from the fighting in the east, finally ending up like so many refugees in Lviv.
In this moment, Lviv hosts more than 200,000 refugees. It is very tough situation.
One of the toughest issues, finding a more permanent place for families to live.
We don't have time to wait until the end of the war. Then we start to build something. No, we have to build it right now.
For the city's chief architect, the solution was these pods, modular housing donated by the Polish army, finished out by city crews with beds and tables, others turned into laundry and restrooms. Then placed in established neighborhoods across the city.
For people to be fully integrated, they need to have the best accessibility to the public transport, to hospitals, to schools, to other facilities.
A place to try and reclaim part of their lives. The sound of bouncing balls replacing bomb blasts, a chance to laugh again, even if just for a few minutes. And while it may not be their dream home, it's a place where they can escape the nightmare they left behind. Yeah, and look, it's basic. It doesn't look like a lot to those that move in. Savannah, it's everything.
Absolutely, and safety, which is so key. Jay, thank you so much. As always, great reporting.
For more, let's bring in Lester Munson. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute and a principal in the international practice at the BGR Group. Lester, good morning. Thanks for joining us. I want to start with this week's development in the war. Russia pulling back some of its forces from around Kharkiv. For context, that's the Ukraine's second largest city. What does that say about the direction of the war? Is Russia pulling back, or are they gearing up for something greater?
Well, I think what we're very likely seeing here is a war that's going to grind on for many months. Russia is not achieving its goals quickly, much as it did not in the beginning part of this war. It is getting bogged down in eastern Ukraine. This is somewhat predictable given what we've seen over the last couple months. Also, we're starting to see the assistance from the West, particularly from the United States, come in and help the Ukrainian forces really begin to push back at least a little bit some of these Russian advances. So what we could be seeing is the beginning of a very long, drawn-out battle where there's not a lot of progress on either side.
And you mentioned assistance from the U.S. I do know that yesterday Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul basically single-handedly delayed the approval of an additional $40 billion in aid to Ukraine. First, let's listen to what he had to say.
We cannot save Ukraine by dooming the U.S. economy. In March, inflation hit a 40-year high. Gasoline alone is up 48%, and energy prices are up 32% over the last year. Food prices have increased by nearly 9%. If this gift to Ukraine passes, our total aid to Ukraine will almost equal the entire military budget of Russia. And it's not as if we have that money lying around.
And Senator Paul did this in spite of high-level pressure from both sides of the aisle, even tweeting last night, "My oath of office is to the United States Constitution, not to any foreign nation." So what's your reaction to this move by Senator Paul and his concerns about the financial impact of this aid to Americans?
Well, let me first say I have respect for Senator Paul. He does some good work behind the scenes, and he's a very collegial member of the Senate, generally speaking. But frankly, the argument that this aid is going to negatively impact the American economy is absurd. It is not going to contribute to inflation. It is just a ridiculous argument, and that is not a serious case being made on the Senate floor yesterday.
Important context. Lester, thank you.
Now to an extraordinary development in the January 6th investigation. The House committee investigating the Capitol attack has subpoenaed 5 Republican congressmen, including Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy. It's the first time the panel has called for sitting members of Congress to testify. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Rafa joins us now. Ali, good morning. Good to have you with us. So we know about these 5 GOP lawmakers that they'd been asked to sit voluntarily, all refused. What else should we know about them, and what does the committee hope to learn from them?
Yeah, Savannah. Well, this is really uncharted territory, as you laid out at the top there. This is not only the first time the January 6th committee has subpoenaed sitting lawmakers. This is the first time a House committee in general has subpoenaed lawmakers in recent history. And this is because Chairman Benny Thompson of this committee says that all of these lawmakers, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, Jim Jordan of Ohio, Mo Brooks of Alabama, and Andy Biggs of Arizona were all previously asked to come in and voluntarily answer questions before this panel. All of them, as you mentioned, refused. So he said it is justified that they're raising the stakes here and subpoenaing these men for different reasons. They have different reasons and different sorts of information that the panel is looking for from all of them. In Perry and Jordan, and to a larger extent McCarthy's case, these are 3 men that were extremely close to the former president. They have all admitted to speaking with the former president before, during, and after January 6th, so they'd have very good knowledge of his thinking at the time. And then in Brooks and Biggs cases, there's a larger question of whether there's any criminal activity involved, whether they were involved in the planning of January 6th or the efforts to overturn the election, Savannah.
And Ali, how have they responded? What have we heard so far? What's the timetable for them to comply, and then consequences if they don't?
So all of them have been asked to testify before those long-awaited public hearings begin on June 9th. I think the deadline for all of them is before the beginning of June. But several of them spoke out on the cable networks yesterday or in statements, and they're calling the committee's request illegitimate. They're calling the committee as a whole corrupt. And so it's very unlikely that they will comply with this. Listen to what Congressman Biggs had to say on Fox News yesterday.
Well, I think this is an illegitimate committee and they don't really have the authority to issue subpoenas, in my opinion. So we don't want to dignify what they're doing. This has been a witch hunt from day one. This is an attempt to go after political enemies instead of trying to get at the truth.
It doesn't really leave the committee with many options here, Savannah. They could refer this to the Ethics Committee, or they could, as we've seen, refer criminal referrals. But the Justice Department is very unlikely to act on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there were reports of debate within the committee on whether to take this step and force these congressmen, who are their colleagues, again, sitting congressmen, to testify. Help us understand why this is so unusual and the possible precedent it could set.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned at the top, this is the first time the committee has done this, first time a House committee in general has done this in recent history. And there was a months-long debate over whether to actually do this, according to Chairman Benny Thompson. But in the end, committee members are arguing that it's completely justified. Listen to what Congressman Jamie Raskin told us yesterday.
Well, an attempted coup and a violent insurrection at the Capitol interrupting the peaceful transfer of power are unprecedented events. And so people have asked, does this set a precedent for the issuance of subpoenas for members of Congress in the future if there are coups and insurrections? And I suppose that it does.
But Savannah, now is if Republicans, as they are poised to do, win back the House in November, it's really unclear how subpoenas will be handled in the future and how several Republicans on this committee will be treated if Republicans do win back the majority in the House.
Lots to keep our eyes on. Ali Rafa, thank you so much.
Now to growing concerns here in the U.S. as parents across the country struggle to find baby formula. The Biden administration says it's looking into ways to ease the crisis, but it could be months before that happens. NBC News business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent has the latest on this big issue and how it's impacting the smallest among us.
The Biden White House under growing pressure to act, with millions of families unable to get infant formula.
Our message to parents is, we hear you, we want to do everything we can, and we're going to cut every element of red tape.
Parents like Haley Rubble say they have no choice but to hit the road to find the formula her 8-month-old son Isaac relies on, driving up to 4 hours to track it down.
We've searched shelves from Texas to Colorado to Oklahoma to Kansas City, anything and everything, and they're empty.
Rubble is one of millions of parents nationwide searching not just for formula, but also for answers, as the national out-of-stock average rises to 43%. Congress calling emergency hearings, saying the situation is alarming, with the administration now considering the use of the Defense Production Act to address this shortage.
I think when you look at the Defense Production Act, you have to ensure that it would actually achieve what you're trying to achieve. And so we're also looking at that as well.
The White House is also urging state and federal regulators to crack down on price gouging. The months-long shortage is a perfect storm of high demand for formula in the pandemic, ongoing supply chain delays, and a voluntary recall by manufacturer Abbott Nutrition, prompting the shutdown of their plant in Sturgis, Michigan. The plant is the only supplier of many specialty formulas, which doctors say children with metabolic disorders rely on for life.
And he's asked me a couple of times if, this means that he's going to die.
Mom Jordan Coleman needs it for her 9-year-old son, Carter.
Each day that passes, we are getting closer to that point where we are not going to have any of his regular formula left that could put him in the hospital.
Abbott now tells NBC News that it immediately implemented corrections to address the items the FDA raised following its March inspection. And subject to FDA approval, we could restart our Sturgis, Michigan site within 2 weeks. From the time we restart the site, it will take 6 to 8 weeks before product is available on shelves. But the FDA tells NBC News they're still concerned that Abbott has not addressed risks of contamination during their production process. As families face a summer of shortages, some saying that relief could come far too late.
Our thanks to Jolene Kent for that report.
Now to that wildfire on the West Coast that burned through homes in Southern California. This morning, firefighters have stopped its advance after more than 30 homes were damaged or destroyed and 900 people were evacuated from the Laguna Niguel area. An evacuation order remains in effect, according to Orange County officials, and firefighters are telling residents not to let their guard down yet.
So we have firefighters on the line 24 hours out there, what we call mopping up. So they are making sure that any hot spots down, especially like in the brush area, have been mitigated. They are continuing to monitor and suppress all the fire within those homes because our priority is to get those neighborhoods repopulated. But until those structures are addressed, we can't bring the residents, any residents back into that area.
About 550 firefighters have been deployed to help manage the wildfire, and officials say only 15% of the fire is contained at this time.
So let's get a closer look at those conditions in California and your weekend weather forecast.
NBC meteorologist Michelle Grossman is with us today again. Hey, Michelle.
Hey there, guys. And yeah, the good news is we're looking at the winds light there today. We're going to see them picking back up tomorrow about 25 miles per hour, but today's going to be calmer. So that's the good news. And overall, the fire outlook looks better today. So that's even better news. We also watched wild weather yesterday. Take a look at this video. If you haven't seen it, it is nutty because we saw a tornado move through in parts of South Dakota. Before, though, that we saw a dust storm move through. And that's where we saw a lot of destruction with houses being torn down. Also, a school, part of a school, power lines down, and a lot of residents are told not to be driving this morning because we saw a lot of structures coming down and it's just unsafe to drive. And that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at rain, we're looking at storms, and we are looking at lightning this morning. So if you are still asleep in some parts, you're probably hearing that thunder as well. This is what it looks like on radar, and this will be the bullseye as we go throughout this Friday. So we are looking at the chance once again for an active day. It was so active yesterday. We had winds gusting near 97 miles per hour. hour with some of these storms. We don't expect quite an active day, but we're still looking at the chance for these storms. This is what it looks like from the Severe Prediction Center. A slight risk. That's where you're seeing the yellow. From Green Bay all the way down to Quincy, Kansas City, and even Oklahoma City. So generally the Great Lakes down to the southern plains. 9 million at risk today. Winds gusting near 60 miles per hour. Could see the chance of some hail as well. Tomorrow will be quieter, and then Sunday we kind of expand that risk to 33 million people. Now we're into the northeast, the Ohio Valley, into the central and southern plains, also the Tennessee Valley. Winds gusting once again to 60 miles per hour and looking for the chance of tornadoes. So we'll end it here. Record highs once again, temperatures in the 90s, upper 80s, stretching from the southern plains all the way to parts of New England. It is summer-like in so many spots. Back to you guys.
Wow. Still some wild weather going on, but thank you
For sure.
for
I know.
a peek at the weekend. Happy Friday, Michelle. See you in a bit.
Happy Friday.
Coming up here on Morning News Now, title fight. The controversy over a pandemic-era immigration policy heading to court today.
Up next, more about today's hearing on Title 42 and how it could impact thousands of people trying to cross the border after the break. Breaking news out of the Middle East this morning. The president of the United Arab Emirates has died, according to state media. He was 73. Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed became the country's second president in 2004 following the death of his father. He's credited with overseeing the UAE's rapid development over that time. The report says the Ministry of Presidential Affairs has declared a 40-day period of national mourning.
Now to the latest on the fight over a pandemic-era policy that could have massive implications at our southern border.
Yeah, a federal judge in Louisiana is holding a hearing today on whether or not to lift what's called Title 42. That's the policy that allowed the federal government to block migrants from entering the country over concerns about the spread of the coronavirus. The hearing comes ahead of an official ruling by the same judge, which is scheduled for May 23rd. NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley is with us now on this. Hey, Julia, good morning. So walk us through what we might hear today from the judge. Could they give an indication into how they will rule on Title 42?
Well, normally we wouldn't hear from a judge during what we're going to see today, which is just arguments from both sides over whether or not to lift these COVID restrictions on May 23rd, as the Biden administration has stated that they would. But in the past, we have seen Judge Summerhays, he's out of the Western District of Louisiana, give an indication of how he might rule. He previously said during a hearing over a temporary restraining order that was just going to keep the Biden administration from lifting the restrictions or doing anything that might start lifting the restrictions before May 23rd. He previously said, and I plan to order this temporary restraining order. So he gave a clear indication of how he would rule. So we're listening for that again today. We have now 21 states suing the Biden administration, mainly led by Republican governors, who are saying, please keep these restrictions in place because they're worried about a surge at the border. But one thing I will point out is that it's a COVID-era restriction, so it can't live forever. And also, there's already been a surge at the border. Title 42 is really only applied to about 50% of immigrants coming in now because there's so many exceptions made to families, to children, to people from countries who can't be deported. What we're really expecting is more of a surge from Central America. But people I've spoken to in the Border Patrol say they do have plans in place to try to quickly process those people and allow them to claim asylum, as is their international right to do.
And that's an important point, right? This is a COVID-era policy. I've reported on it at the border, and I know you have as well. But what are experts telling you about the impact of when or if Title 42 is lifted?
Yeah, that's right, Sinclair. It's really interesting. It depends on who you talk to. One group that I really like to talk to, because you can cut out some of the politics, is local officials. So you've got mayors, sheriffs, NGOs who say they're all preparing for the lift of Title 42. They're not getting involved in whether or not it should be or shouldn't be. They're just trying to prepare. They say what they need is more money guaranteed from the federal government to help with things like transportation, shelter, and then to also build places where people can be vaccinated and tested if indeed they do have worries about COVID-19. Also, we have those Republican states saying there will be a surge, and we have the Biden administration who really has tried to push this off for some time. This is something that we thought they would lift very early on in the Biden administration. Now we're here in May of 2022. They're coming up against midterms. It's not a time they want to see a surge either. So it could be that if the court does decide to put a temporary restraining order, we might not see a very fast challenge from the Biden administration. That's something I'll be watching for.
Julia, you mentioned how Republican states are going to say there's going to be this surge, but let's talk about the other side. How's the issue playing out with Democrats on Capitol Hill, especially those that represent those border states where this is going to have an effect?
That's right. There have been some Democrats who have also signed on to letters to the Biden administration saying now is not the time to lift Title 42. They say that has been a rise in COVID cases, and also that basically the Border Patrol and DHS as a whole just can't handle more immigrants right now. We already saw in March numbers climb higher than they had been since those records started to be kept. Over 220,000 apprehensions at the border. I should point out some of those are recidivists, meaning they're the same people counted twice because they're pushed back into Mexico and they cross again. But these Democrats say that they need more of a plan from the Biden administration before this lifts. And the Biden administration has been scrambling to try to show what their plans are in place, how they plan to process people quickly. But for a lot of people who are worried about a surge, they say it's just not enough.
Julia Ainsley, as always, thanks for your stellar reporting on this. And coming up, Georgia law enforcement under fire after a traffic stop involving a team bus for a historically black university.
I think they came on the bus, saw that we were a majority black team, and just assumed that we had drugs on us.
When we come back, the growing calls for an investigation and what authorities had to say about it.
Welcome back. Members of the lacrosse team from the historically black Delaware State University say they were racially profiled by Georgia police during a traffic stop. Body camera footage shows the officers searching their team bus for drugs, going through personal items and baggage. The university president is now condemning the search, saying the team is, quote, incensed. NBC News correspondent Blaine Alexander has the latest.
Well, many of the members of the team and their coach believe that this was an incident of racial profiling, but the sheriff is defending his deputies' actions, saying that it's something that they would have done with any other vehicle.
It started with a stop, as routine as any other. A large bus pulled over in South Georgia late last month.
The reason I'm stopping is for a left lane violation.
On board, members of the women's lacrosse team from Delaware State University, a historically black school. The team was returning from a match. This body camera video shows officers speaking with the driver when one officer says their drug-sniffing dog gave an alert outside of the bus. His colleague responded,
"There's a bunch of dang schoolgirls on the bus. There's probably some weed, maybe."
That's when officers began to search the luggage.
So if there is something in there that is questionable, please tell me now, because if we find it, guess what? We're not going to be able to help you. Okay?
At one point, a deputy found a wrapped package. A student tells him it's a gift from her aunt.
We're going to open it. We have to.
In the end, no drugs were ever found. Now the team and their coach say they were victims of racial profiling.
The officers were just saying they do it to everyone and they weren't singling us out.
Sydney Anderson plays on the team.
Did you believe the officers?
Not at the slightest. I think they came on the bus, saw that we were a majority black team, and just assumed that we had drugs on us.
But the Liberty County Sheriff says in a known drug corridor, other vehicles were also searched.
I do not exercise racial profiling, allow racial profiling, or encourage racial profiling. For what I have gathered, I believe that the stop was legal.
Delaware's governor is calling the incident upsetting, concerning, and disappointing, and the state attorney general is calling on the DOJ to investigate.
And Delaware's congressional delegation is also condemning the incident. Back to you.
Blaine Alexander, thank you.
One American is dying every 5 minutes from a drug overdose. That's according to recent provisional figures from the CDC. That same study claims that fentanyl, which is a synthetic opioid, is 50 times more powerful than heroin and increasingly to blame. Now, there's a new program equipping bar owners with the medication they need to save lives.
It's a good crowd, good vibes. Weekdays are slower, but we kind of prefer those, actually.
Let's give it up for Ryan Thomas.
It's a Wednesday afternoon at Revision Lounge in Manhattan, and co-owner Troy Hahn is preparing for a comedy show later on.
The bar's made of recycled money. The fabric that we have on our walls is recycled bottles. The bar behind me is actually cut up tables that we found on the street, and we actually cut them in half.
But with the opioid epidemic looming across America, he's aware the fun could stop at any moment.
I've witnessed a person OD in our bar. We didn't know what it was, but we were worried.
Soon, Troy and his customers will have an extra piece of reassurance: life-saving kits behind the bar. They contain naloxone, or Narcan, an FDA-approved drug that can rapidly reverse an opioid overdose. It's a partnership between the New York City Department of Nightlife and the Department of Health.
We also see Narcan kits behind the bar, much like a CPR kit, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are having heart attacks behind, at bars left and right, but it's just a good preventative measure to have.
Medical experts say Narcan is easy to administer, similar to nasal spray.
First, peel the kit, place it in the nostril, and push the medication into the nostril. So peel, place, and push. What's really interesting about naloxone is that even if a person is not actually experiencing an overdose of fentanyl, that there is no harm being done to a patient.
The CDC reports a record 107,000 opioid-related deaths in the U.S. in 2021. 2/3 of these deaths are from fentanyl and other synthetic opioids. Even though the Surgeon General says naloxone is safe and that benefits outweigh any potential risks, certain states require a medical professional to administer the drug. In New York City, these kits are free to those who request it.
We're really seeing this as, again, a harm reduction, life-saving measure, and not criminalizing individuals for their behavior or what they may or may not be doing, or venues. The most important thing right now is to save lives, and that's what this program is about.
Now, Troy hopes to do just that by getting the Narcan kits and training.
If we have one step that's going to make it a better situation for somebody, to save a life is, I think, essential.
The Narcan Behind Every Bar campaign provides free training on how to use the Narcan kits. To learn how to sign up, visit nyc.gov/nightlife. And Savannah, this is really needed, right? Fentanyl is increasingly showing up in our drugs, and so harm reduction tools are just another way to stop that.
Absolutely, and what a smart place to be putting it.
Absolutely, in a bar, right?
So great. What a great story. Thank you so much for bringing us that. Coming up on Morning News Now, crypto crime. Hackers stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Bitcoin. A look at how the feds are working to track down the thieves.
And an out-of-this-world discovery will explain the science behind these first images of the black hole at the center of the Milky Way. Welcome back. Let's talk money. More than $200 billion was erased from the entire cryptocurrency market on Thursday. Bitcoin tumbled below $27,000, its biggest drop in over 16 months. The plunge completely wiped out all gains made in 2021. Ether, the second largest digital currency, also dropped 23%. High inflation fears and bleak economic outlooks are partially to blame for the mass sell-off.
Now, the crypto crash isn't the only thing investors are worried about. Hackers are trying to target crypto accounts, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars from Bitcoin investors. Federal agencies are also tracking cryptocurrency payments for illegal activity, putting potential buyers on high alert. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Delanian takes a look.
It only took a few seconds for Philip Martin to lose his life savings.
It's been very frustrating. I'll be honest. I've had panic attacks.
$165,000 worth of investments in cryptocurrency gone after he says hackers stole his password and wiped him out. Crime involving crypto is increasingly in the sights of federal agents. The Department of Justice recently announced the largest government seizure of money in U.S. history. The government grabbed what it says was $3.6 billion worth of stolen Bitcoin and charged this New York City couple, also notorious for online rap videos, with money laundering. Court records indicate the couple is now in plea discussions.
We bring it here to have
Chris Gencheski was the lead investigator in the case, not with the FBI, but rather the IRS.
I thought the IRS collected taxes. Yeah, certainly we do, but we also investigate violations of Money Laundering and Bank Secrecy Act.
Now in the private sector, Gencheski was until recently one of the top cryptocurrency specialists in the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit. He helped shut down everything from a child exploitation ring to a North Korean hacking scheme to a terrorist fundraising appeal, all involving cryptocurrency.
Is cryptocurrency easier to trace in some ways than cash? Yeah, very much so. If a bank was robbed 5 years ago, you have no idea potentially where that stolen cash could be at this point. With cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, every transaction is on a public ledger, it's public, and it's there forever.
While crypto might appeal to criminals because they can move funds anonymously and bypass the banking system, its every move can also be tracked. And new software is helping investigators at the IRS figure out the real people behind those movements. That and good old-fashioned detective work, which exposed North Korean agents using fake IDs to open cryptocurrency accounts.
Here's an example of North Korea using Photoshop to replace the face of the photo that was submitted. They were trying to pretend to be somebody else.
You guys figured that out because these photos are the same.
But if you look closely, you can see it's the exact same T-shirt. The hands are being held in the same way.
Details that helped crack an international case. But for individuals like Philip Martin,
I just think right now, I personally am hesitant of investing until there's better consumer protection laws.
A warning for crypto investors and newcomers alike. Ken Delanian, NBC News, Washington.
Now to our financial headlines, where there may be trouble for Elon Musk's plans to take over Twitter.
That's some big news. CNBC's Bertha Coombs joins us now with those details and the other stories topping this morning's business news. Hey, Bertha, good to see you.
Hey, good morning, ladies. So Elon Musk says that he has temporarily put his $44 billion deal to buy Twitter on hold, citing pending details in support of data that spam and fake accounts represent less than 5% of users. Some people are saying it's kind of specious. He could have found this out sooner. Twitter stock is tumbling in the pre-market to the lowest level since Musk disclosed his stake in the company in early April. Earlier this month, Twitter estimated fake accounts made up fewer than 5% of its daily active user base during the first quarter. Musk has said one of his priorities is to remove spam bots from the platform. Meantime, Apple has reportedly been coaching managers at its retail stores on how to talk employees out of unionizing. Vice reports the company has sent around talking points such as an outside union doesn't know Apple or its culture. It's also encouraging store leaders to touch base with employees about potential union activity. 2 Apple stores have officially petitioned the government to hold union elections so far, and another is looking to do so. Reports say Apple hired anti-union lawyers, and some workers say the company held a meeting to spread what they believe were anti-union messages. And in other Apple news, the company is holding its annual Worldwide Developers Conference next month. While the one-day event on June 6th is mostly virtual, Apple is sending out invites for a limited number of in-person attendees. Those folks will be able to watch the keynote address on site at Apple headquarters. Developers were given a chance to apply for invites earlier this month, and Apple is choosing people at random. Allegedly. The company is expected to showcase the new versions of iOS and software for the Watch, Mac, and other products. I don't know if they're really going to pick those names out of a hat. Do you think?
Well, I don't know either.
Have some people
I trust your skepticism. If Bertha's skeptical, I'm skeptical.
Fair enough. Bertha, thank you.
Thank you.
This next story is definitely out of this world, but please don't space out. The Event Horizon Telescope, which is actually a network of 8 telescopes in different countries, kind of cool, unveiled the first pictures of a black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy on Thursday.
It's nicknamed the Gentle Giant. Hopefully we're about to find out why. It's only the second black hole ever to be photographed, but the photo is just the beginning.
Let's bring in Mike Massimino, a former NASA astronaut and professor of mechanical engineering at Columbia University. He's also the senior advisor for space programs at the Intrepid Museum. Mike, good morning. This is a really big deal. So how does this extend our knowledge of the universe, and how do black holes actually function?
Well, thanks for having me. It is quite an event, a discovery that they made. They knew this black hole was there. They actually won a Nobel Prize for measuring the mass of this black hole. They won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2020 for doing this, and the same scientists now wanted to try to get a good image of it. So they knew it was there. They could measure its size, and now they have this image of it and understand more about how it behaves. That it is having just a trickle of energy going inside of it, and that's how it's being fed. It's much smaller than the other black hole that they were able to image back in 2019. And this one, which I think is pretty cool, it's in our galaxy. So it's right at the center of our galaxy, whereas the other one that they photographed back in 2019 was in another galaxy. So they think that these types of a black hole or something similar to it exists in the center of every galaxy, and now we know for sure that we have one in ours, how big it is, and now what it looks like.
Yeah, and how are they able to do this? I mean, it seems like it's probably not an easy feat to take a picture of a black hole. Not that I've ever tried, but how'd they do it?
Yeah, that's kind of what I think is very interesting about astronomers. When they make these discoveries, they're almost like detectives, like space detectives, where they have to figure out clues and how they can look. They can't necessarily just point a telescope at the sky and see one of these things. They have to be very clever and creative about how they do it. And so, as you mentioned earlier, I think it was Zinkley mentioned that they use a series of 8 telescopes around the world, radio telescopes around the world, to be able to act as one telescope, because no one telescope could pull this off. But by putting together the information that they can collect as 8 telescopes acting as one, which is pretty phenomenal, I think, to coordinate all that, they're able to get this image.
And how does the black hole photographed in 2019 compare to the one photographed on Thursday?
Well, if you look, to me, they look pretty much the same, right? Because they're kind of like these rings, and that would make sense.
Hey, you said it, not us. You've been up there.
But that's to me like as a non-professional astronomer. But if you look on the left, which is a nice shot you have there, on the black hole on the left, that's the one in the center of our galaxy, and the one on the right is the one that they imaged back in 2019. So the one on the left's a little blurrier because it's smaller, and therefore it changes more frequently. The one on the right is much larger. The original one that they're able to image is much larger, and therefore it doesn't change as often. So they're able to, just like anything, if you're trying to take a picture of something that someone is standing still and the light is low, you can still get a pretty good image if the person doesn't move and you're able to hold the camera steady. But if things are moving, it gets a little blurrier, and that's what we're seeing here because it's smaller. It's moving, it's changing more quickly. It's harder to get a clearer image as compared to the one that they got a few years ago. So there's the difference. But to me, you can kind of tell they're both in the same family of black holes.
Both black holes, exactly. But very cool nonetheless. Mike Massimino, thank you so much. Always love to have you.
Thank you.
You bet.
Coming up, the achievement of a lifetime at just 18 years old.
Yeah, we'll introduce you to the woman who just made history on Mount Everest. Ever heard of it? Next on Morning News Now.
Talk about perfect timing. A set of pregnant identical twins from California gave birth on the same day. Sisters Jill Justiana and Aaron Cheplack both welcomed their sons to the world on May 5th. They told People magazine they planned on getting pregnant at the same time, but did not envision giving birth on the same day. Jill was scheduled for a C-section on May 5th, and Aaron was due May 15th, but her water happened to break on May 5th. Their babies were born 5 hours apart, and get this, both babies weighed exactly 7 pounds. 3 ounces and measured 20 inches. So congratulations to both families. But also, is this, it is real. It's just baffling.
I don't believe you.
This is what we call twinning.
Yeah.
Hardcore twinning. Squared.
To the fourth power.
Children. Impressive. Up next, an Illinois teen is making history by completing one of the world's greatest challenges at just 18 years old.
Lucy Westlake just became the youngest American woman ever to reach the summit of Mount Everest. And she joins us live from Everest Base Camp in Nepal. Lucy, we are so happy to have you with us this morning. This is so neat. Congratulations, first of all, on this amazing feat. I hope you are so proud of yourself because you should be. So first, just obviously tell us, what was it like? How hard was it? What did it feel like when you were at the top? Fill us in.
It was incredible. There was really nothing like being at the top of a mountain, just being like the tallest thing around, and the views are just breathtaking every single time. We summited like right after dawn, and it was amazing. And actually, the moment I was most emotional when I cried was actually an hour before we reached the summit when the sun was coming up. It was amazing, but very, very hard. Yeah, it was very difficult. But every step was worth it. It was, definitely worth it.
And that sounds so beautiful. You mentioned it's hard, and it's no secret this is a very dangerous climb. More than 200 people have died over the years trying to accomplish what you just did at 18 years old. So why undertake this very risky adventure?
I love the mountains. Every time I leave, they call back. I have to go back. And I love just trying to like push myself to the next level, trying to push my limits, mentally, physically. And the mountains will do that for you. They really, they help you remember who you are. By push yourself. That's why I love it. And I hope to inspire others to do the same, because that's really like, it's so fulfilling to push yourself in those ways.
Absolutely. I mean, not only do you love the mountains, you know them well. You've climbed quite a few of them, all the highest points in the United States. Also, Mount Kilimanjaro, Denali. Now you just reached the highest point on Earth, all at a time when most people your age are really only focused on graduation. So first, I mean, I just have to ask, you are graduating, right? I know that's next. And then what's happening after that?
Yeah, I'm so excited. I didn't think I was going to make my graduation. I kind of like mentally prepared to like miss prom, graduation, all end of the year stuff. But now that we summited so early, that I can go back and I can walk at my graduation. So I'm really excited for that. And then after that, I'm going to run at USC, cross country and track. So this fall, I'm going to be gearing up for that. And then I really, my goal is to be the youngest woman to climb to do the Explorers Grand Slam, which is climbing to the top of Everest and then going to the North and South Pole. So I have two continents in the North and South Poles. So I'm really hoping I'll be able to do that.
Oh my gosh.
Before I'm 20. I want to break the record.
Absolutely. Well, you must be the coolest one graduating. I'm sure all your classmates are like, that's amazing.
You definitely have the best photos.
Yeah, for sure. Congratulations, Lucy. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you coming to us all the way from Nepal. And go Trojans. Have fun. Good to see you.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks so much.
And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.